Morant with a running start. Elevates. Oh, it dunks. Oh, my goodness.
Tie game in overtime. Gasol will turn. His heave is gone. Memphis on top. 7-10 remaining.
Conley now with three. Count it. A 15-point lead for Memphis. And Blake Griffin gets into it on the floor with Randolph. Hard to tell if there are any punches being thrown under there, but Griffin took acceptance.
Adams going long. Morant. Oh, he hit it. John Morant, insanity.
You gotta be kidding me.
Welcome to Grits and Grinds, a Memphis Grizzlies podcast. My name is Keith Parrish. On today's episode, I'm going to do kind of a Grizzlies Off-Season Primer, looking at where the Grizzlies are as a franchise, what their goals should be this offseason, and how they might achieve those goals. I think it's important to kind of focus on who the Grizzlies are, who's on the team, what are the objectives specifically beyond, winning an NBA title. Yes, that's the objective, but how do we get there? What are the steps we take to get there? Does that mean making a big trade? If we make a big trade, what are our parameters? What are we looking at? What should we be focusing on as fans? What do I think the front office should be prioritizing? I'm going to talk about all those things on this episode, and I think it's useful. I find it useful to reflect back on the previous season and what questions maybe we had coming into last season and what questions got answered. If we look at the Grizzlies' pursuit of a title as a multi-year operation, which it is, and we think about where the team has been, and last season was a step backwards a little bit. It was disappointing to not be able to follow up on the success of the previous season, where you went 6 games into the second round against the Warriors, to now lose this season in the first round against the Lakers, to win fewer games in the regular season, and maybe have a few more question marks about your roster. I think it's fair to call it a slight speed bump in the goal of making it to win an NBA title. So just as a reflection, coming into last season, the big questions were, I think these are universally agreed upon, this is what everyone was talking about. The big questions for the Grizzlies were, can Jamorant and Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane each make another big leap? Also, a big question was, will the team finally make some kind of consolidation trade? Will they finally trade away some future picks? And then I think next was, will Zaire Williams step up into being the needed wing player that has size? And then probably next, finally, was, will any of the rookies hit? Because they made a decision last offseason to restock the cupboard with a lot of rookies. And so the question was, will anyone step up? And we got a lot of great answers to some of these questions. As far as the most important ones, can Ja, Jaren, and Dez each make another leap? Well, maybe Ja Morant did not, and Ja Morant's potential and his on-the-court play has gotten murkier because of off-the-court issues, and that still hangs over the Grizzlies right now as they expect a suspension coming for the start of next season. So maybe Ja Morant didn't take another leap. He was basically already at this level in the previous season. But Jaren and Desmond made huge strides. Jaren Jackson Jr. won the Defensive Player of the Year award. He improved his offensive game. He got his three-point shooting stroke back up. He increased his field goal percentage. He became an all-star. Jaren took a massive step forward as he continues to develop. Desmond Bane, he struggled with a toe injury for a lot of the year, but despite that, he set all kinds of personal best marks. He averaged 20 points per game. He became this ideal backcourt partner for Ja Morant. We no longer started thinking about what trades can we get to bring in, a guy like Zach LaVine or Bradley Beal, things we were talking about 2 years ago. No, Desmond Bane became that guy. So In the broadest sense, I think coming into last year, the big questions we had about Ja, Jaren, and Desmond were answered in the affirmative that, yes, we now have a super big three. Ja has maybe already hit his potential, but Desmond and Jaren became closer to what we thought maybe peak versions of those guys could be. And so that's a great thing for the Grizzlies and their pursuit of a title. Now, all of the other questions, maybe the answers weren't as good or what we really wanted. Will the team finally trade away some future picks and make a consolidation trade to bring in a third star or a fourth star? No, they did not do that. Will Ziaire Williams step up into maybe, battling with Dillon Brooks for the starting 3 role? No, Ziaire had a lost season. So that was a big negative for the Grizzlies, and it's a bigger question mark for the team going forward. Now that the team has had this kind of public divorce from Dillon Brooks, and you look at the roster, and that's a big thing to think about with this offseason. What are we going to do at the small forward position? Then will any other players step up? Will any of the rookies hit? Will David Roddy or Jake LaRavia, will they become main rotation players? And I think the answer is honestly no. I think the player that hit last year that was unexpected was Santi Aldama. Santi Aldama emerged, and I don't think anyone was really that focused on him coming into last year as far as like being a key cog or a big question for how the Grizzlies' pursuit of a title, how does it include Santi Aldama? Well, Santi Aldama was a very pleasant surprise. His development was great last year, but none of the rookies really proved themselves as playoff performers, guys you can depend on in the postseason. Yes, David Roddy had a lot of positives, and I think most Grizzlies fans are optimistic about who David Roddy is. But if you take an objective view, an outsider's view, no one around the league is like, wow, they really found something with David Roddy. They're like, hey, he's nice. David Roddy didn't receive a single vote for the all-rookie teams. In the playoffs, he shot 30% from the field. So, again, solid rookie season from a guy taken in the 20s. Could he become something in the future? Absolutely, certainly. So could Jake LaRavia, who we didn't see very much of last season. But you wouldn't say, I think objectively, that like these guys hit, we're like, all right, these are now part of the core going forward. So as we look at the questions that got answered from last year, and we now think about this team going forward, and the question marks with the off-the-court stuff with Ja, the fact that Dillon Brooks is not around, but we have a proven big three in Ja, Desmond, and Jaren. I think looking ahead to this offseason, which really kicks into high gear with the draft coming up in a few weeks, it's important to take stock of exactly where the Grizzlies are if they don't make like a big trade. Everyone is kind of thirsting for this big trade. I'm going to tell you right now, spoiler, I think status quo is more likely than not. I know we're all talking about Zach Kleiman talking about it's the time to go all in, or like, we're going to push all our chips into the center of the table. Frankly, he's kind of said this stuff before. I mean, last season, or at the end of the 2021-2022 season, after getting eliminated by the Warriors, he basically was like, all right, the title window starts now. And most of us took that to mean, all right, we're going to go for it. It's time to go for it. Maybe let's forget all the internal development. The title window's open. Let's go for it. And then, of course, they let Kyle Anderson and DeAnthony Melton go, and they added 4 rookies to the roster, and they didn't sign any free agents. So despite Zach Kleiman saying it's time to go all in, or something to that effect, I still think when you look at the landscape of the league and who you might trade for, it might be more likely than not that this team enters next year with a very similar roster to what they have right now. So the roster right now, if we talk about Dillon Brooks moving on, there are 14 guys under contract for next season. You got Jamorant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. Then you have Steven Adams. You have proven rotation guys in Tyus Jones and Xavier Tillman. You have Luke Kennard. You got David Roddy, Ziaire Williams, Santi Aldama, and then John Conchar, Jake LaRavia, Kenneth Lofton Jr., and Brandon Clark, who will be rehabbing his torn Achilles, probably for most of all of next season. They also, in the draft, have the 25th pick. They have 2 picks in the second round as well. So they have 14 guys under contract, and whoever they pick in the first round, that is your 15th guy. I think it's very possible those are your 15 players on the Grizzlies roster going into next season. That's not maybe the exciting offseason content we're looking for. Everyone wants to think about big trades, and maybe we will make a trade. But it's important to note the roster's pretty full, and I don't think they're done with any of these players. They're done with Dillon Brooks, but I assume they're still interested in the 14 guys remaining under contract. Now, they still have Vince Williams Jr. on a two-way spot, and one of the interesting things for this upcoming season, which is a change in the CBA, is there will be 3 two-way spots. So the Grizzlies will almost certainly use all of those two-way spots and will add 2 more players besides Vince Williams. It might just be the 2 guys they take if they keep their second-round picks. Of course, as you know, they usually trade up for everything. They usually trade up in the first round. Like, will they actually use the 25th pick this time? I don't know. One of the most interesting wrinkles or things they can do with one of their two-way spots this year, and I think I'm right about this. I actually double-checked with someone who knows the CBA pretty well. The Grizzlies could, in fact, bring back Kennedy Chandler on a two-way this summer. There are rules that, like, you can't waive a guy and then add him to a two-way if he was on a standard contract. But once the league calendar shifts, I believe he could return to the Grizzlies. So if Kennedy Chandler doesn't get a better contract offer, if he's not offered a guaranteed contract on another team on the main roster, it's possible they could bring Kennedy Chandler back to like even play Summer League this year, which it'd be interesting. It would kind of undo what I think was a pretty bad roster decision last year, where they ended up drafting him and then had to cut him in order to add Kenneth Lofton Jr. But hey, if you bring him back on a two-way contract, hey, that retroactively makes letting him go not matter at all. It also maybe fills a roster need that this team could have if Jamorant gets suspended. It also makes you more open or available to trading Tyus Jones. Now, I still don't really love the idea of having an undersized point guard project on this specific roster where your best player is not that big of a point guard. He's, size-wise, Jamorant on the slight side. Tyus Jones doesn't have good size. Almost all of your guards don't really have that good of size. A lot of players on the roster, maybe a third of the roster, isn't really, like Desmond Bane. He's not big, doesn't have a lot of height. So maybe Kennedy Chandler is not the perfect fit, but you would have to think the front office that drafted him and a front office that's been quite good at drafting, they saw something in Kennedy. They wanted him. If they could get him back for a two-way deal, maybe they'd go for it. So that's something to monitor. But of course, Kennedy can sign anywhere, and he already has the guaranteed money from his rookie contract that the Grizzlies have to pay out regardless. So this team now, with the pretty full roster, I do think it has some roster needs. I do think what they do as far as maybe adding another point guard is interesting. Like, do you need to have a third traditional point guard on the roster? If Jamorant's out for 20 or 40 games, you can start Tyus Jones. Is having Luke Kennard and Desmond Bane as your fill-in ball handlers enough? John Conchar in a pinch, just not having a point guard at all? Like, would they play that way? I don't know. It seems like at least on one of those two-way spots, you might want to have someone who is traditionally a point guard, or at the very least a combo guard who can handle the ball some. Beyond that, like, what is the main need on this roster? I think when you talk about winning a title, your main need is that starting three, a guy with size, a guy who can shoot, who can defend. Now, the ideal player like that is what everyone wants in the NBA, so it might not be available. When you look at just kind of maintaining where they are, getting back to the playoffs, becoming one of the 8 best teams or so, being a team that has a good chance to win a first-round series, maybe a remote chance to make it to the conference finals or finals, I do think this team might need another big. With Brandon Clark on the mend all year, with Steven Adams as frankly a question mark. Steven Adams has a lot of NBA minutes under his belt, and the fact that his knee injury did not heal the way they anticipated makes that another question. Xavier Tillman performed very, very well as a starter, but I don't think he's a level of starter that's going to get you somewhere in the postseason. And I also think if Steven Adams is out at all, you might just need another big preferably a rim-running, high-flying guy. I feel like they need another lob threat on this team. I feel like this team needs a lot more athleticism, honestly. I would like to see some of the highlight plays come back from guys who can really get up and jump. A shot blocker, an alley-oop finisher, I do think could be a need on this team. Now, you do have a lot of power forwards. You got Jaren, who obviously can play center too, but Jaren is a power forward. Santi Aldama is a power forward. And Kenneth Lofton Jr., maybe he's going to play some more this year. I think we all hope. Maybe he gets involved. Jake LaRavia, possibly more of a power forward. Might be more of a 3. I don't know. But I feel like the team can handle another big on this roster. Now, getting a big or getting another ball handler or even another project or prospect at small forward, those are all things that can be accomplished in the draft. As far as free agency, I don't think they're going to be active in free agency, although it's certainly possible. They do find a way to move on from a player and open up a roster spot and then use the MLE to sign somebody. It's possible in the Dillon Brooks free agency when he chooses a new team that they work out a sign and trade. I actually think it's very important. I think it's a priority of this season is working out a sign and trade to move Dillon Brooks. Even if you don't bring back a player, you got to at least get that trade exception so maybe you can then use it to acquire another player later. You don't want Dillon Brooks to walk for absolutely nothing. That would be a disappointment, a really bad end to the Dillon Brooks era in Memphis. I think if you can bring back just a useful player, you might go ahead and do it and then just figure it out later. Although maybe this team, if they already like, again, the young guys they have on the roster, they might prefer to just keep a trade exception so you don't end up having a roster crunch. But the big question for this offseason is how do you replace Dillon Brooks? And then what would you do for a trade? Maybe those are related. Maybe the big trade would be to just get a Dillon Brooks replacement. How do you choose whether or not to make a trade? I think it's an important thing to consider. Which players do you consider untouchable? Of course, as a front office, you have to have those things in place, those thoughts in place. As a fan base, we can talk about them, we can think about them. For me, I have the shortest untouchable list on the Grizzlies that I've had in 4 seasons. For me, the untouchables are Jamorant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. I think last year there were 12 guys I wanted to keep. This year, I'm happy to keep several of them, but none of them have approached untouchable for me. When I'm ranking the most valuable players on the team or what's my trade value ranking for the Grizzlies, we got Ja, Jaren, Dez, 1, 2, 3, and then the greatest gap of all time before I get to the 4th player. And I'll be frank, I don't know who the 4th player is. It is either, here's who I'm considering: Steven Adams, Luke Kennard, Santi Aldama, and David Roddy. But would any of those 4 players hold me up in a trade for getting a player I wanted? I don't think so. I think when we consider these trades and we think of these Grizzlies players and, we get attached to our players as fans, that's natural, that's totally good. But I'm trying to objectively evaluate each of these other guys, and the questions I'm asking myself about each of them is how much championship equity do they add? How confident am I that any of these specific players, how confident am I that Steven Adams is going to get the Grizzlies over the hump in the playoffs in the next 2 to 4 seasons? So when I look up and down the Grizzlies roster and I apply the filter of how much championship equity is this one specific player adding, how confident am I in them in the upcoming seasons, they're going to be what we need to make it to the finals, that's where I become more yeah, I don't know. That's where Luke Kennard ranks higher to me, where I'm well, you're probably always going to need a guy who can bang in 50% of his 3-pointers. Steven Adams, the age and injury question makes me less certain of that. I know Steven Adams is a proven high-level contributor that can help you, finish as the 2 seed multiple seasons in a row, and that's important. So that's why I have Steven Adams up there. The other guys, it's just hoping that they become better than they currently are. And so I have Santi Aldama and David Roddy in there. I think the next tier for me is Zaire Williams, Jake LaRavia, Tyus Jones. You might have noticed I haven't put Tyus Jones in there. I think Tyus Jones is a solid NBA player. I currently think I value him more right now for his matching salary and what he might bring back. I'm trying not to judge him too harshly for a disappointing playoffs that he had this season and some bad playoff games he had the year before. Wasn't very good the year before that against the Jazz either. But Tyus, very good NBA player, but I do think he's more replaceable than we act like he is. I think backup point guards are one of the easiest things to find in the NBA. I think there are other guys out there who were in the Grizzlies system would perform nearly as well, or maybe as well as Tyus Jones has done. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I am undervaluing how good Tyus Jones has gotten and how much of a steadying hand he has been. Zach Kleiman has called him a cultural cornerstone of the locker room, so maybe he does provide a lot of value leadership-wise there. But personally, I think, if I'm like doing the old exercise of it's an expansion draft, you can only protect 9 guys, I might protect not Tyus Jones. I might take LaRavia, Zaire Williams, Santi Aldama, David Roddy, Luke Kennard, Steven Adams, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., John Morant. Now, Zaire Williams, of course, was terrible last year. I'm just crossing my fingers and hoping he gets good. I don't have any secret knowledge that he's going to. I don't even consider myself being that optimistic that he is, but this is where I trust the Grizzlies front office. They saw something in him. He has all the tools. He has the size. He's still young. Maybe he turns out really, really good. Now, if I did this exercise a year ago, Brandon Clark would have been much higher. But now with Brandon Clark dealing with injury, I don't know where to place him. I put him at the bottom. Next, I have Xavier Tillman, who, again, maybe I'm undervaluing him. But I also think much like backup point guards are pretty easy to get, backup centers are pretty easy to get. I hope Xavier Tillman continues developing. Like if Xavier Tillman added a 3-point shot, if he started shooting the basketball on the perimeter, all right, his value goes up. But right now, I feel like Xavier Tillman, Kenneth Lofton Jr., and Brandon Clark are the least valuable to me right now, franchise building. Maybe those guys all have a lot of positive value league-wide. I'm wrong. But I think I would maybe prioritize keeping the other Grizzlies players over them. And then last, for me, it's John Conchar. I don't think he has much trade value at all. He's a regular season innings eater. Okay, that's fine, I guess. Also, I'm not like super sold on all these things. If you have a strong opinion, and I'm certainly open to hearing it and having my opinion changed, but I would like that to demonstrate at least, I think there's 3 untouchable players and everybody else. Show me your fake trades. I am intrigued to see your fake trades. I am not sold or dogmatic about like keeping them all or being like, we have to have this guy. Like even Luke Kennard who was really, really good, in the minutes he played in the postseason. And of course he shot 54% in the regular season as a Grizzly player. Yeah, he was awesome. Can I get a better player for him? All right. I'm now open to trading him for a better player. And what kind of better player would that be? What kind of thing could we swing for the fences for? Let's tackle that right after this short break. Download the brand new official Grind City Media mobile app. Explore new ways to access your favorite Grind City Media content, from your favorite shows and series to news and entertainment. Stay connected with exclusive content at your fingertips with the new Grind City Media mobile app, available in both the Apple and Google Play stores. All right, when we consider the Grizzlies making a big trade, something I've always said, I like to consider what thought process we should use as fans, and the front office should certainly use, when making a trade or deciding whether to make a trade. Basically, the most important thing to me is, how does this player help or fit alongside Ja, Desmond, and Jaren? That's it. Period. I want perfect fits alongside Ja, Desmond, and Jaren. When we start talking about sending out future first-round picks, and we start talking about paying guys $40 million a year or $50 million a year, we have to consider the salary somewhat. One of the important things to consider for this Grizzlies team going forward is they no longer have their most important players on rookie deals. Desmond Bane's the last guy on a rookie deal. It used to be jamorant was on a rookie deal. Jaren was on a rookie deal. Desmond has the cheapest or maybe the best rookie deal in the entire NBA as far as for his production versus what he gets paid. Jaren's extension has already kicked in. Ja's extension kicks in. And yes, as we spelled out before, Ja and Jaren's extensions are actually relatively cheap. But Desmond's extension is going to kick in the following season in 2024, 2025, and then the team becomes more expensive. It becomes much tougher to build around them, and you have to somewhat consider how much is the salary of another player you might be bringing in. Now, I say all that, we don't have to get carried away worrying about big salary. I see a lot of people right now talking about Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown had a bad series for him against the Heat in the conference finals. And I see lots of Grizzlies fans being like, oh, we don't want to pay Jaylen Brown $45 million. Really? You don't? Why not? It's like, oh, because the new CBA, it's really going to punish you if you go over the luxury tax. Yes, that's true. And I don't know if Jaylen Brown's the perfect fit on the Grizzlies. I think he's a good fit on the Grizzlies. Maybe if I hold myself to the standard, would I trade 5 first-round picks to pay this guy $50 million? Probably not, because I don't think he is the absolute perfect fit alongside Ja, Jaren, and Dez. But just as an example, hypothetically, if you talk about like paying Jaylen Brown a contract that starts at like $40 million, it's not that bad because Jaren's on a cheaper deal. This season, Desmond is still cheap. Yeah, 4 years out, it gets really, really tough. But like, say hypothetically, the Grizzlies traded, say, Brandon Clark, Tyus Jones, and Zaire. Their salaries match perfectly with Jaylen Brown this year. And then you signed Jaylen Brown to a 4-year, $190 million offer. And you lock down Desmond Bane for like a 5-year, $175 million extension. You still would be under the dreaded second apron in a couple of seasons. So like, it could be done. And I know a lot of people talk about like, we don't want to sign a bad contract or get a bad contract on the books. It's always important to remember, in a vacuum, no contract is really that bad. It's all very dependent on what your other salaries are, what your cap sheet looks like. Like a couple of years ago, Grizzlies fans would be like, I don't want to pay Tobias Harris $40 million a year. That's a bad contract. Well, guess what? A couple of years ago, the Grizzlies were paying Gorgie Jang, Justice Winslow, Mason Plumlee, and Dion Waiters $53 million total. All right, would you rather pay Tobias Harris $40 million or have $50 million of dead money on your salary sheet? So like in that situation, Tobias Harris is not a bad contract. Would you rather pay next year? Would you rather pay Brandon Clark $13 million and Tyus Jones $14 million? Or would you rather have Jaylen Brown? I know it's not a 1-to-1, and then you have to pay Jaylen Brown more after that. But we don't have to be that worried about salary going forward because jamorant is not on a supermax. Jaren Jackson Jr.'s deal is relatively cheap for the next 3 seasons. So you can still add a big salary and not be too worried about luxury tax. Now, if you don't know, these punishments the league has added for if you go way over the luxury tax line, if you're $17.5 million into the luxury tax, that's the second apron and the punishments get really painful. So that is something you're going to have to avoid. And you do have to be cognizant of it. Like you're not going to trade for a guy, like you're not trading for Bradley Beal's contract. You're not trading for, I don't know, Damian Lillard. Not that you would. I'm trying to think of the most expensive contracts in the NBA right now. But I do think when the Grizzlies think about trading, you try to identify what's the perfect fit. For me, it's still the perfect fit because I don't know if trading your whole future as far as draft picks, as far as trading your whole future collection of draft picks to bring in a guy who maybe isn't the ideal perfect fit, I don't think it's worth it. I think if you look at the Nuggets right now and the Heat right now, facing each other in the NBA Finals, neither one of them used a ton of draft picks just to bring in the one big guy. The Heat got a little bit lucky by Jimmy Butler forcing his way there. The Nuggets drafted the best player in the world in the second round. That is a huge leg up. But if the Grizzlies have trust and faith in Ja, Desmond, and Jaren, all of those guys, all-star level players, I think biding your time and just trying to find the right piece around them maybe makes more sense than trading out 4 first-rounders for one specific player. Now, I was on board with the rumored offer for Mikal Bridges. 1, because Mikal Bridges is young. 2, I think Mikal Bridges is a perfect fit on this Grizzlies team. I think he's a better fit than Jaylen Brown. I think Mikal Bridges maybe connects the pieces a little bit better than Jaylen Brown did. Also, Mikal Bridges on a very nice contract. All those things together make it worth it for me to, all right, let's trade a bunch of picks to try to get that guy in the door. I still would try to do it again, although apparently he's basically untouchable now with how well he played for Brooklyn after the trade deadline. But I want to get the perfect fit. If I'm trading out all of a bunch of future picks, for me, it's the perfect fit. Otherwise, let's just kind of wait and see what happens. And that's part of why I fall back to, I think status quo might be maintained. If we talk about what are we going to do for Dillon Brooks, how do we replace Dillon Brooks? I think they might replace him internally. I think you have a couple of options. There's several options on this team right now that I would be fine with going into next season with. I think the roster as is good enough to kind of repeat the success they had in the regular season last year. Win 50-something games. I think they can win 50 games with the roster they have right now, even if Ja misses 25, 30 games. If there's team health, if there's health for Desmond and Jaren and Steven Adams, I think they'll be fine. If they don't make a trade or bring in a free agent to replace Dillon Brooks in the starting lineup, there are 3 options right now I'd be fine with starting the season with as the Dillon Brooks replacement. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if David Roddy was the starting 3 next year on opening night, and I'm fine with that. Let's give it a go. What if they just went back to Zaire Williams? I mean, Zaire Williams started 31 games 2 years ago. What if last year was just a weird aberration? Go back to Zaire Williams, see what happens. You could even start like Luke Kennard. I don't think the fit is ideal. I think I like Luke Kennard maybe as a 6th man. But you could start Ja and Luke Kennard and Desmond Bane. I mean, 2 years ago, they started Grayson Allen and Dillon Brooks. It's not that much smaller. I mean, Desmond is shorter than Dillon, but wingspan-wise, not that much difference. But, like, you could start Ja and Luke Kennard and Desmond Bane and Jaren and Steven Adams. Make other teams adjust to you. So, like, I'd be fine with starting Kennard or Zaire Williams or David Roddy. Also, they could just turn to John Conchar again. John Conchar as a starter alongside Ja and Desmond and Jaren and Steven. Doesn't bother me one bit. Also, if you want to get weird, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen in the offseason as far as like Jake LaRavia coming into his own. Vince Williams Jr. was pretty solid at playing for the Hustle this year, according to the people who watch The Hustle. That's not me. I mean, one of those guys should show up. You have this summer like a wide open competition for who wants to be the starting 3. I would say it's a wide open competition between Zaire Williams, David Roddy, Jake LaRavia, Vince Williams Jr., Luke Kennard. I mean, what about Santi Aldama? You want to get weird? Let Santi play the 3. I think there are options already on the roster for replacing Dillon Brooks if you don't pull off a sign and trade or make another big splash, or if you don't do something on draft night to bring in your newest starter. I mean, I don't know what the odds are of the Grizzlies making this big all-in move. I'd say they're low. Maybe it's just hard to envision something like that happening. But I think they're probably going to be patient. And I think you might get a better chance to trade for maybe the 3rd star or the 4th star or the missing piece in the regular season once teams have their seasons fall apart and then look to reload or shuffle guys around. The problem in the offseason is everyone's optimistic. And the prices for acquiring guys through trade can be pretty steep. Are there guys out there I think the Grizzlies should be paying the steep price for? Who do I think the Grizzlies should target? What free agents can we make a run at? Well, I'll get to all that in a future episode. Thanks, you guys, for listening. That's all for today. Please do me a favor and subscribe to the Grits and Grinds YouTube channel. Hope you're having a great Thursday. I will talk to you soon. Go Grizz.